Hi, I'm Robert Thiemann. I'm the founder of Frame. Welcome to Frame Live, how spaces can help us heal. There's never been a better moment, arguably, to discuss how spatial design and product design can support our health and well-being. In the year of the coronavirus, we've seen our current healthcare systems at the max of their capacities. Staff works under enormous pressure. And those of us who are not working in healthcare, so that's everybody else, even if you didn't catch the virus, you kept your job and you're well insured, chances are that you suffer from stress and other mental health issues. So how can design deliver a response to this global health crisis? In the next hour, we'll discuss the lessons learned in 2020 and where to go from here. Today, our panel consists of 3 experts in the field. Let me introduce you to the panel. That's Barbara Spurrier. She is the Managing Director of the Well Living Lab and Senior Vice President at Delos in Rochester, Minnesota. Ab Rogers, he's the founder of his namesake design firm in London. And Jason Schroer, he's the Director of Health and the Principal at global architecture firm HKS, based in Dallas. Hello there, welcome.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Afternoon,
Hi.
good morning, afternoon.
Barbara, I've very briefly introduced you as the Managing Director of the Well Living Lab. Can you explain what you are currently working on with the lab? What are you exploring?
Absolutely. So thanks so much for this opportunity. Our Well Living Lab opened in 2016 on the campus adjacent to Mayo Clinic. And it's a collaboration with Delos and Mayo, bringing the building science and the health science together. So it's been a really interesting year for all of us. And what we've needed to do is to think about, transition and pivoting to COVID and research that we can do to try to be part of providing some scientific answers. A lot of unanswered questions when we think about virus transmission. So it's really accelerated the pace and the work that we're doing and our core mission of transforming human health and well-being in the indoor environment. So happy to reflect that in more detail later.
Thanks, Barbara. It sounds like an exciting moment, also a very sad era to be working on, well, what you're working on. I mean, it's a necessity. It's a necessity that you improve our healthcare systems, and you're at the forefront of it. Well, we hope the best.
Thank you.
Ab, hi. You have been working, as far as I know, in hospitality and retail for the majority of your career. And I think in 2019, you've delivered a Maggie's Cancer Center. How did that happen?
Well, I think, we grew up learning through retail, but retail design when I was young was kind of very, very playful, and you could really learn about how to create internal experiences, both in museums and in shops. And through that, you start to learn a palette of moves that really engage the user, the visitor, the shopper, the museum goer. And you try to give them a more positive experience. Our design has always been very invested in experience, in immersive. And I think in about 2010, we started working with Maggie's, mainly doing voluntary consulting for them around how to communicate around the exhibitions, around creating interventions in their centres. And in about 2013, they commissioned us to do a centre based on this very close relationship we had created, which is a great honor because our name is a little bit less vogue or a little bit less star tech than many of the architects they originally worked with. That was an amazing experience. We spent 7 years trying to really get under the skin of what makes Maggie so magical, getting under the skin with what a visitor who was affected by cancer needed, and how we could start to create architecture or an interior design that becomes what we call the third helper in a way. This this current, how can we distract people from the pain that they are in? And as we know, we've learned from COVID, as your brilliant introduction, you know, isolation is a really scary thing. The value of human life is so much more powerful than we give it credit for. So therefore, the way that we can get the environment to respond to the person, which is what we learn in retail, is also so very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And along through Maggie's, we've been doing, you know, we spent the last also 3 years creating a style guide for the pediatrics unit in St. Mary's. We're presently working on neonatal in St. Thomas's, cancer, the outpatients cancer centre in Charing Cross, and a few others. So we've become very interlocked in this area. And for me, the more we can have design that really makes sense, the closer it should be to the human heart.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ab. I'm looking forward to learn how your experience with retail and hospitality has informed healthcare design. And then Jason, welcome. Please tell us, you, as a director of health at a global architecture firm, you work in a very specific silo. I can imagine that this year, every other sector has also been affected by, well, healthcare issues, so to say. So have you been more than before dealing with your colleagues working in other silos like aviation or workplace design? Because I can imagine that they can learn a lot from your experience in this healthcare silo.
Yeah, Robert, I think it's a very keen observation. You know, I have spent majority, if not all of my career, really focusing on places of healing, better known as hospitals, right? And so, although some might argue that, right? You know, when the pandemic hit, I think, you know, Barbara can attest to this, that, you know, the body of evidence right now just does not exist for us to be able to respond in a way with knowledge that we had obtained previously. And so to a certain extent, we were kind of, every day was a new day for us in terms of how to deal with the pandemic and how do we advise our clients as they're going through, you know, this scenario. Hotels began to shut down, as you know, schools began to shut down, offices began to shut down. And so we began to, you know, really think about, okay, what is our role in this? And Ab, I love your idea of design being the third helper, because I absolutely believe that. And Barbara would say that evidence can prove it. You know, and I certainly believe that too. So we began to consult more and more with our friends from hospitality, our friends from more of the commercial and office building sectors, even our friends in venues, which we, you know, our sports and entertainment group, about how can we deal more effectively and advise our clients more effectively during the pandemic, during these times, about things like infection control, things like protocol on how you move people in and out of spaces. And so it absolutely kind of opened our eyes to the necessity, right, of some knowledge and expertise that we've learned and kind of take for granted in designing hospitals and healthcare spaces that now apply much more globally to other building types. And so it's been quite the journey.
I can imagine. Thanks, Jason. Well, for the audience, we'll talk around images today. So we've asked these three panelists to send us images that represent their ideas. We think you will have something to look at other than these talking heads. And it will be easier for the panel members to make their points clear when they talk about specific images that represent specific situations. So we've asked them to submit images that represent...
Three images.
Sorry? 3 images,
it's
yes.
Quite specific amounts.
Yes, because the first state of affair that we would like to address is, let's say, the post-pandemic state of affair of healthcare and of design for healthcare and well-being. After that, we'll be discussing the current state of affairs. So what is happening now during lockdown and with the pandemic upon us. And At the last part of the session, we'll be looking into the future. So how do the panel members see the future of design for health and well-being develop, learning from, well, I think this year. So let's start with pre-pandemic state of affairs, and then I'd like to invite Barbara to kick off. Barbara, what does this image stand for you? What does it represent?
Well, thank you. So this is an image of our Well Living Lab, and just to provide a little bit of context, no one's really ever done a Well Living Lab like this before in the world. So this is actually a rendering of our environment, and it's really all about human health and well-being. We bring in human subjects into the lab because we're trying to co-create solutions with real people. So having a lab like this where we can study how indoor environments can improve human health and well-being, and having what's a very unique data and building infrastructure to enable this kind of human study research has really, really been exciting as we've been building this when the lab first opened in 2016. So we have about a 5,500 square foot laboratory. Again, we bring real people in for every single study. We go through the Mayo Clinic Institutional Review Board, given that we have human subjects. And they're part of a really interesting environment. We can control the environment, lots of technology. So we have almost 500 sensors in the lab. We can look at temperature and lighting and biometrics, occupancy, air quality. We have a weather station on our building, motion detection, humidity, all kinds of things. And we really collect and analyze just thousands and thousands of data points. So this image, just speaks to what we've been building, the research that we were doing. We were right in the middle of studies going on in our office and our home environments. So what's also very interesting about the lab is it's reconfigurable. So we can go ahead and change things. The lab pre-pandemic was set up as 4 office modules, 1 being a conference room, and 2 residential or home modules, with studies going on and studies planned with human subjects coming in. So of course, we'll get into the pandemic stage then in terms of the changes that we needed to make. And I also wanted to share, just in terms of background and context, is my role leading up to the role here with the Well Living Lab was helping to bring design thinking into healthcare delivery. Mayo Clinic's core value is that the needs of the patient come first. But what we really were discovering is, how do we really understand those needs? We were looking at things like retrospective patient satisfaction surveys, thinking that we understood needs of people and patients. And so it really got us going on this whole journey to really think about design thinking, bringing in really some of the first designers into healthcare delivery. And I love what you're all thinking about. The very core of all of this is really design, and trying to think about how can we meet the needs of our users and bring them in as collaborators and partners. So thanks, Robert, for the question.
In those 4 years, so if I understand you well, you've not been researching people in a hospital setting, so to say, in a medical setting. I hear you talk about residential settings, meeting rooms. So is it anything but healthcare that you're looking to?
Yes, and so, we really think about, healthcare and health, and this whole thing about, where the line stops and starts. Our work has been really about, bringing people in that are really, healthy adults, I would say. Increasingly, though, our direction is connecting in with chronic diseases. So there's a lot happening in what we would call a V2 of the Well Living Lab. We've been able to demonstrate the scientific viability of the lab. We can turn on the lights and pull data from sensors and do all kinds of things. And our plan, as I'll talk about hopefully in more detail, in building something called the field study platform, will allow us to do research really in any setting in the world that has an internet connection with the cloud infrastructure that we've developed. So our plan is definitely to go into other kinds of settings, but this is a place where we've started. We've actually done 15 studies. We've had 12 peer-reviewed publications. It's really important to the work that we do that we share everything so we can all be learning together.
And can you reveal just, let's say, 3 very important takeaways from research from the past 4 years?
So we've done, really important research in trying to think about what about the office environment? What about the importance of natural light as we all see our environments here, and the importance in bringing daylight in? How does something like that actually impact worker, not just satisfaction and comfort, but their performance and productivity? There's something that we launched called ELCO, which is acoustics, lighting, and thermal comfort in the office environment. And that got us on a journey there too, where we learned from our first study, and then we kept expanding our learning by bringing in dynamic lighting, blue lighting, other variables to try to deeper understand the importance of things like lighting. I've done studies in things like the importance of biophilia. So we all may assume that we know that, of course, plants and sounds of nature and things are important. But there's so many unanswered questions in terms of what science has actually demonstrated, to Jason's point about generating the evidence. And that's what we do, with our human subjects. We've done a number of other studies trying to look at stress as we introduce, workers into stressful situations. We always try to balance that, of course, with our institutional review board approval process. How do factors impact stress, and what are things that we can think about in sort of moving beyond that?
So in the end, you're providing architects and designers with evidence. I mean, they all think they know what's good, what works, what doesn't work, but in the end, you will provide the evidence.
Yes, and we're excited. In the last year and 2 years, we've expanded now to include our home environments right in our lab. They're set up as almost small efficiency apartments, if you will, but it allows us now to really begin to, and we're planning for a number of experiments with the person in their home. You could even imagine sort of the person in their office, the person in their home, the office in the home, all kinds of interesting ways that we can think about conducting our research, as well as I mentioned with our field study platform, being able to move beyond the walls of our laboratory to do studies in even a more natural, real setting.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and I wanted to add, Robert, that on our welllivinglab.com, all of our research, our studies, our the information that we've generated is available. We try to translate what we're learning into lay language. So what does this actually mean? So I just wanted people to know that that's available if you're interested to learn more.
Yeah, it's very important for the design industry. Ab, you sent us actually 2 images of your Maggie Center at the Royal Marsden as pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Well, we were being very selfish and showing our own material. I want to say to Barbara that we'd love to come and be part of her experiments. We'll see if we can corrupt her experiments in some way,
Awesome.
infiltrate them with an invitation. I suppose, I mean, this is interesting for us because we've spent so long studying both Maggie's, the user, and the architecture that surrounds it. It was, whereas we're continuously being rushed, and beauty of Maggie's, because money has to be raised to pay for it, is the same time as you design it. There is a much less urgency, but much more authenticity in a way to design it. And I think, to touch on what you asked before, when we used to design retail, we were also designing in museums. And so we would always like the idea that we would take from culture and put it in commerce, and take from commerce and put it in culture. So in a way, since then, working in hospitals, in restaurants and hotels as well, it gives us all these tools. And the hospital seems to be a very good place. All these healing spaces is a very good place to start to use these tools. So I think the first thing we did when designing Maggie's was to create a diagram around the user, and to really design it from the inside. And then the final thing was the wrap around the clothes, was to dress it. So I suppose the things to us which were really important, which has already been touched on by the panel, is of course light, the circadian rhythm. In Maggie's writes very beautifully and very sadly about being told that she has cancer in a corridor of a really industrial hospital, running to the toilet for shelter and finding these huge gaps in the bottom of the doors and feeling very vulnerable. So we need to create a space which feels really welcoming. And it needs to be a space where anybody can be comfortable. So we don't want to use cutting edge architecture, which is alienating it. We want to marinate the visitors in light. We want to make sure that any surface they touch is warm. You know, people who've having chemotherapy are very sensitive to metal. So all the door handles are hand carved. Where possible, we really used hand processes. So you feel the hand, and the hand is the relationship between the building and the human. So this feeling of the handmade, the hand touch becomes really important. So once we've worked out this diagram of uses and functions, we then wrapped it up in this terracotta. The terracotta is dug from the ground, it's a very natural material, and we glazed it in these 5 different shades of red to act as a beacon. But the roof is very much considered as the 5th facade, to use one of my father's favorite expressions, bless his cotton socks. And so from the industrial hospitals around it, you can look down to it. But another really important thing from the outside is the windows and how the windows look at Piet Oudolf's garden. And to have the honor to work with Piet Oudolf, the incredible Dutch plantsman, to nestle, you know, we're landed in a car park. We create this diagram and then we surround it in this amazing garden and we align the views of the window to the plants. And as they grow and change, it becomes really interesting. Sorry, now we can go inside. So from inside, you come in and you can kind of see everything. You can see where you want to go. The staircase hopefully is very inviting. The public space is surrounded by this pink ribbon that holds your attention. The kitchen is never far away. But maybe more importantly than any of those things is you can always see a way out. There's never a sense of being hemmed in. There's never a sense of architectural claustrophobia. You can always, you know, even from here, you have 1, 2, there's another view here. You know, you have 4 views out. And I think that's a really important part of keeping someone's attention. And I've really seen people in this, not just my Maggies, but in all the Maggies, incredibly ill, but still able to laugh. And I think that ability to laugh, one, is incredibly beneficial to fixing oneself, but also is a great sign of successful architecture, because it makes you feel free enough that to feel less worried and less conscious of yourself. But even, you can't see the door handles here, we'll touch on those later, but even these lights, I went out to the factory and hand dipped them all. And a lot of this is subliminal, you're not aware of it, but I think it's that attention to detail, it is that passion for the subject, which we lose in industrial hospitals. There's an amazing space on the 6th, 7th and 8th floor of the new build of St Mary's, which was built in the 80s, where Bridget Riley has gone in and she's painted the corridors in her classic stripes. But these stripes are so powerful that any hospital trolley or breathing facility gets obliterated by the presence of this colour. And if you go into a hospital and you're feeling really anxious and you see all these machines, it makes you feel more anxious. If you go in and you see these amazing stripes of colour, you get a sense of relief that you can breathe. If you go into a hospital and you can look outside, or you can open a window, wouldn't that be amazing? And that's going more into post-COVID. But it's this idea of really designing around the user. And this, which is very much what we've always tried to do in hotels, in restaurants, in shops. It's a very different user. And this is a user who needs more help from us as designers. But the other principle is we have this big central space, this hubbub, and then we have a series of much smaller spaces that plug into it. So if you're very introverted, you can shuffle around the backs of these rooms and never have to come into the main space and find your sense of peace and find some dark colours, some plain colours, stare out of windows.
Thanks, Anne. With an eye on the time, I need to. Sorry about that. I'm sure we'll hear more later from you, Jason. Let's move on to your image that represents the pre-pandemic state of affairs in healthcare design, what are we looking at?
Ab, I love your energy, and I'm taking notes. I love the words that you use too around marinating visitors in light and the passion for the subject. The energy is fantastic. Those are all things that we certainly like to focus on as well. This image, yeah. By the way, Robert, the format I think is fantastic. The idea of talking from images, which we're all visual people, right, is something that's, I think, really, really great. And I'm going to steal this format for some internal workshops.
Agreed.
You're welcome.
But this image was really about the thought of this merging that we're seeing globally, really, between hospitality and healthcare, right? The idea of creating a more positive experience for the user, whether that be upon arrival, whether that be upon their journey to their room, whether that be their journey through some high-tech rooms, right? How do we create spaces and places that can heal? And I think Ab touched on it, in terms of there are many times when these spaces can be harsh, can be intimidating, can give you this sense of being trapped. And we are working on ways in which we can create designs that eliminate those things, because those things are barriers to healing. And so when we think about the idea of creating a positive experience, we begin to tap into some ideas through, designing hotels and resorts and more of a hospitality experience. And I think Ab hit on it too, in terms of retails and museums, bringing culture in, those things and blending those things together. We have found have been very successful in creating environments that can support healing potentially better than what we have done in the past. And so that's really this image. This is a Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. It's a lobby shot. It's not a shot of a care area, but I think what I'm trying to do is just paint the picture of that blurring of the lines between hospitality and health, and kind of the mindset that we've had over the last decade around design and how it's evolved in hospitals.
It's strange for me as a non-native English speaker that if you speak about hospitals and hospitality,
right,
there's such a divide between them usually.
There is, and the root of the word is the same, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
It's obvious that those can be blended better than we have in the past.
Very good. So let's move on to, the pandemic. The pandemic hit, and what did it mean for your research? What did it mean for your work, Barbara? What did it mean for your subject, perhaps? Did it change anything?
So it really changed everything for us. It became an opportunity to take a look at what was happening with the pandemic and how could the Well Living Lab step up and be part of the scientific discovery and investigation. So we use something that we call sort of what's desirable, viable, and feasible. So what's desirable in the sense of what does science need us to do? What are the unanswered questions? Sometimes there may be something that we can do that is to validate what already exists, but many times it's what don't we know? And what's viable in terms of what are the assets we can bring together from our Well Living Lab. We have a multidisciplinary, amazing team of about 22 people. So we have Delos employees, Mayo Clinic employees, and a number of collaborations, as I'll speak to in just a moment, that we're building. So we think about that. Who can we bring together when we think about what we can explore? And then what's feasible? We think about, what's just exploding and changing with technology all the time. So all those things sort of come together. And as we thought about that, with our COVID-19 situation, it was an incredible time to step up and say, yep, we're going to be part of this. And so we launched something called the COVID-19 and Beyond Well Living Lab Safe Indoor Environment Program. And in the beginning, we called it the Safe Indoor Office, but then we thought, no, it's not just about an office. I love how Ab said it's really all about the relationship between the building and the human. We think about different kinds of indoor environments. And we thought, we're going to learn things about virus transmission that could be applied in other settings. So what about the home? What about schools? What about different kinds of environments? And that was important in the beginning as we started to think about this. So what we did, and really it's all about collaboration. And I would say the pace of what has happened this past year will be studied in the future. It's been incredible to be part of that. What we've been able to do, you know, for scientists, and we know that we can get frustrated, that science can take a long time before we have discoveries that can translate and be applied to change things. And in this situation, it's who do we need in terms of additional collaborators? Of course, Mayo Clinic is right in our backyard. Mayo Clinic's amazing. And we were able to reach out to Mayo Clinic infectious diseases, molecular medicine, virology. We actually needed to have labs at Mayo where we could grow the virus. We're not at a biosafe level in our lab that we can do things like growing a virus, and we'd be hearing from the Institutional Review Board if we tried. So how can we think about some of these collaborations with Mayo Clinic? And then we developed our first formal academic collaboration with the University of Minnesota. So again, the University of Minnesota is right in our backyard, a premier academic institution, working with the Department of Public Health and working with the Department of Mechanical Engineering. So I know I don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but the mechanical engineering group and somebody named Dr. Chris Hogan is amazing, working with the Hogan Lab. I remember when we first got started, and this speaks to all the great passion I'm hearing from Ab, from Jason, from Robert. We had our first session of bringing everybody together to start to level set. What could we do here with the Well Living Lab and the pandemic? Our first session was on a Sunday morning. I think it was something like 8 in the morning, and we went until 11 in the morning. It was amazing bringing these scientists together from all these different disciplines to start to frame up our research program. So it has 3 components as expressed here around air, surface, and behavior. I don't have time, I don't believe, to go into a lot of detail, but I just want to give you an idea of what we're doing. This is, again, available on our website for you to track along if you're interested. We've been doing pilot studies, and now we're actually into the trials. So when we look at something like air, again, I mentioned Dr. Chris Hogan. We have amazing building scientists on our team as well in this collaboration. Dr. Hogan happens to be the editor of the Journal of Aerosol Science. So again, it's so exciting because he knows what's going on already in the United States and the world. So we don't need to repeat things, but what are some of those unanswered questions that the Well Living Lab is uniquely positioned to try to address? So with our air aim, we're doing things, just to give you an idea, and our building scientists, you know, really geek out about things like this. We're using what we call a fluorescent tracer. This is something that's actually being ejected from a coughing, breathing simulator. And there's a particular kind of size distribution to evaluate how changes in room layout. So what about things like, you know, we're all trying to think about desk placement and spacing and use of barriers and the operation. So what about the ventilation? What about the filtration? How does it actually impact the droplets and the droplet dispersion? And we're doing this in our actual Well Living Lab in our simulated office modules. So that work is going on right now. There's so many things that we've needed to do, again, in this kind of collaboration, you know, technology that we can bring together from Dr. Hogan's lab. We have a nebulizer that's hooked to a respiratory mannequin that we got from the Mayo Clinic Respiratory Care colleagues. So we can actually simulate airway anatomy in an actual person using mannequins, because it's not safe, of course, to bring human subjects into the lab. So what about mannequins? So lots of things that are going on to try to investigate, you know, particle dispersion and how it might impact virus transmission that's airborne. And I think we're all hearing about this all the time. And so how can we take that and then move it out? So our plan is we'll be doing we've done our pilot studies, we're in our trials now. We'll be completing some of our work over the next couple of months. And then how do we actually move it out into the field? So looking at things like places of learning and schools and office environments, Again, what are the unanswered questions or things that would make sense going into a field environment that would allow us to keep sort of studying and learning? So that was a long answer, Robert, sorry.
It's a really excellent answer and very, very educational.
Yeah, exactly. So no, it's fantastic that you can give this extensive answer. And so for me, the takeaway would be that you will be coming with a report of sorts somewhere next year where you speak about what architects and designers can do to better control the air quality within spaces, what role surfaces play in spreading diseases like COVID-19, and how people could change their behavior when using spaces. Would that be right?
That's a great summary, Robert. Absolutely.
We're
We're also assessing things like, what about a secondary air purification sort of unit? We're doing a study in January in our office module. So if people are talking about that, well, you have the systems that run through the HVAC systems, but when we talk about a secondary unit that you might just plug in the wall or create solutions like that, you know, what's the evidence? What do they actually do? So there's a lot of layers and levels to things, but absolutely, we actually will be generating data. Again, we're going at warp speed here. As I talk to all my scientific friends, that this is amazing in terms of the pace of how quickly things are moving. So we actually hope to have insights that we're generating by the end of Q1.
Fantastic. We're looking forward to that. Ab, what did the pandemic mean to you in terms of spatial design?
Well, I'm being very naughty, so I'm continuing to use images from the one project, which is Maggie's, which is what I'm quite keen to talk about. And I suppose more kind of looking back at some of the moves that we made, which have been very well regarded, have been very successful during the COVID period. And it's interesting to say that when COVID happened, of course, Maggie's got closed down during the lockdown, but it became a respite for the hospital staff. So you have the Royal Marsden up the road, which ended up absorbing a lot of the country's cancer patients, and the doctors working night and day in this very stressful condition, and they could come here and they could escape. And the fact that Maggie's was both about the communal and the coming together, but it was all about these very individual spaces, really gave you opportunities for people to sit with no fear of social distancing. So before we were talking briefly about the toilets. And for us, the toilets, we always make a very bright color. They always have skylight coming into them. And they always have space to breathe. And so air can pass through them. They're very easy to keep clean and to maintain. All of the door handles are wood. And against the instinct, wood has been incredibly good as an antibacterial for COVID. I mean, I've got much more scientific people on the panel here than me, so I'm nervous to say it didn't make any sense. But I believe, you know, left to its own devices, the COVID lasts on a wooden handle for 4 hours, and stainless steel handle is 48 hours or within those.
Barbara, from a scientific point of view, can you agree?
I don't know exactly what our scientists would say about that. In fact, it's a study that we're actually doing. We're looking at the surface and the transmission of the virus and its ability to replicate. So it isn't just how long does it sit there, but can it actually replicate? So there's some really interesting things we're doing with infectious diseases in Mayo Clinic in our lab right now. So back at you, Robert and Ab.
As an artist, I can always misuse science in any way. I don't really need justification. Anyway, I think they were stainless steel definitely came out less well than people imagined. And they just have these spaces to stare out at nature, because I really think during COVID we've all yearned for nature, to open your window. These simple things. And I know, of course, you're out your window, you can also blow other people's COVIDs back into the room, but as long as the windows are reconnected in the same way. We're very keen on finding these spaces around to put in little places to sit, because we think sitting is something which can be quite spiritual, sitting with light pouring on your head. Even if you've got people passing, you feel like you're quite removed. So you're living in this different world.
So during the pandemic, you discovered that the staff of the hospital is also benefiting from your design for cancerous patients and their visitors.
Yeah, we like to say always people affected by cancer, because it's not just the patients, it's also the husband, the wife. I don't mean to be political, but it's quite important. It's this more wider audience, which is important. But yes, completely. These are humanist spaces, so I think they're very good to make people feel better. And I took my dad there, and then he's had a very bad accident and he's not been well for a long time, but it really just going to this space really affected him. Like if you take someone into an amazing chapel or a church, the cold surfaces, the sense of light, the sense of something.
Thank you. And Jason, what happened in your industry when the pandemic hit?
I struggled with this one, but I struggled with all three because there were so many different images and so many different emotions that came through. I was thinking, how do you convey, a story, effectively through the images, and which ones make the most sense. So I picked as the pendulum swung all the way to some things that we had to do. We did some of this stuff a lot in the stateside, but a lot of this was also considered globally, is these alternate care sites that weren't hospitals, right? So the conversion of a convention center for care space.
And that's the exact opposite of the image that you showed previously.
That's right. And I think that's the point, right? Is the pendulum swung so far that, you talk about the contrast of this and some of the things that Ab has shared and some of the things that Barbara's talked about. This couldn't be any more sterile, any more impersonal of an environment. And you do not look at this image and think healing, right? But the pandemic really woke us up in that, there was kind of three things that we learned that weren't necessarily design related, but were related to how we're caring for people. But no one would have guessed that a shortage of PPE or personal protection equipment would impact us as much as it did. There was a worldwide shortage. And so we struggled in our hospitals to figure out how can we cohort staff in order to care for an overflow of patients. And so then there was the space needs. Not everyone understands that not all patient rooms are equal. So when you think about the sickest patients, those are very specialized patient rooms. Intensive care rooms is what we refer to them as. They have the ability to, plug in machines and provide additional support to patients and staff that are needed for the sickest patients. Not all rooms are designed that way. And then when you began to see the increase in the need for patient rooms, we began to look at converting other spaces that weren't designed for patient care. And, think about that image that I shared originally of the beautiful hospital lobby. Can you imagine that being full of, bays to care for patients, right? We didn't imagine that going into 2020. So what I'll be talking about a little bit more in the third image is more of a systematic approach and systems thinking. But you begin to think about flexibility. We design hospitals. These buildings typically have to, function well for 50 years plus because of the investment that we make in this building type. And so we've always approached our buildings with the idea of flexibility. Where we fell short in the pandemic is that we didn't think about designing buildings that could flex quickly enough. And so that's kind of where our thinking is going now in terms of systematic thinking about how do we design spaces a little more universally with a little more flexibility. How does infrastructure then support that so that we can make these conversions, not a conversion that we're looking at here, but a conversion in a more of a healing in a hospital environment more effectively for scalability. We've also found that while many of these alternative care sites were built, not all of them were used. We certainly have learned that because we would provide better continuity of care in the hospital, that's where we want to keep patients. And we have staff shortages worldwide. And so you want to be able to maintain that care with staff that's trained to do it. And so there's a lot of stories. We actually had almost completed a hospital in Wuhan when the pandemic hit. The government took the hospital, they mobilized the military, and they actually activated the hospital before it was complete in order to deal with the influx of cases for the pandemic. So there's so many lessons learned here, a lot to go into, but this was an image of contrast, and I thought it would be interesting for us to contemplate and talk about.
Yes, and let's look at the way forward in the next stage of this panel. So, Barbara, you've started to investigate the role of air, surfaces, and human behavior. We'll see the results of that somewhere next year. How do you see the future of well living?
So this is an image, it's highlighting KB Home, one of our Well Living Lab Alliance partners. So our Well Living Lab Alliance is a union of innovative organizations. We have over 22 members. In fact, HKS is a member, is a founding member, and we're so thrilled in that collaboration. What this is showing is really, when I talk about the field study and the opportunity to move our research out of the walls of the laboratory into more realistic environments, just like the person's home. We're so excited. This has just been announced. We're working in the first stage here on something called the model or a demonstration home, bringing in different vignettes that are informed by our research. So our work like safe at home, what we're learning in our COVID research that we can bring into the home environment. Thinking about things around how do we consider health remote checkups that bring in wellness intelligence, if you will. There's so many things when we think about now smart devices working together to actually be able to measure your health status and your key biometrics. How can we do that in a way that's unobtrusive to the person and helps them know if an action might be needed to prevent some sort of adverse event? So this whole thing about center of gravity, going to the person, going to the patient, going to the human, moving beyond the walls, not just of the Well Living Lab, but moving beyond the walls of the clinic and the hospital. So things are exploding around telehealth, around video visits, really trying to think about the convenience for the person of bringing healthcare to them. So we start here with our model home with these vignettes, and then we're moving into something called a test home. This will actually be built to our Well Living Lab specifications. It'll be an actual laboratory where we'll be conducting studies, and then a community of homes. So our venues of work are around healthy home, healthy office, and ultimately healthy community. And our interest is to actually collaborate with people living in their homes on different kinds of studies. We could target people with different kinds of chronic disease. We could think about air quality with people with asthma. We're definitely very interested in healthy aging and aging in place, helping people stay where they are because we know that's their preference. And when we just think about the chronic disease situation in the United States and the world, it's 60%, 70% of adults are living with a chronic disease. They don't want to be defined by it, that I'm a diabetic. I just have diabetes. I need to make it work in my life. And we think there are a lot of ways we can help them by how we, again, connect the building and the human together in these kinds of environments. So we see this very much as the future and very, very excited about it.
So that means sort of outsourcing medical service, bringing them to people's homes with the use of digital devices and other ways of monitoring people's behavior from a distance, right?
Yes, and I would say in the outsourcing, it's just reimagining and rethinking, because with Mayo Clinic, there's a lot of work going on now with the digital platform, the Center for Connected Care. How do we help people stay where they are and really preserve the medical center and the hospital for patients who need it the most? You know, there are even studies going on all around the country and the world around hospital at home. How do we even bring higher acuity kinds of services directly into the home? So I think our hospitals will shrink in terms of numbers. I think we have too many. And I think as we just really start to explore this directly with the healthcare system, it opens up a lot of opportunities with physicians and care providers and care teams as partners. And again, the person, the patient, right in the middle.
Jason, that doesn't look right for your line of business. The number of hospitals will shrink.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have that, and we have aging populations. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, because there's no doubt that more services and more things can be done at the home. And as we develop more and more mobile technologies, right, to where people can be monitored and checked and don't need to go to a hospital, we could see smaller hospitals and less hospitals. Absolutely.
And also smaller and less hospitals built out of necessity, like the one you've shown just before.
Correct.
So
I would also love to play with the design of those interiors, because it seems you're proposing really radical notions which are very, very life-changing. You're proposing them in a very traditional American domestic interior. So it'd be interesting to see what design can start to do to work within the same notion of this well-being that we're talking about, to see how that could affect, also work alongside with the surfaces, with the technology, with the air, etc. So you start to layer up some type of solution.
So Ab, you also sent your vision of the future in that regard.
Well, my vision of the future. I think you know, I think everything that's been said is, you know, it really touches me, and I think before, you know, what Jason was talking about within the repetition of these cells is really scary. And when you talk to anyone who has spent time in intensive care during COVID, the thing that they come away with is the scarring of not seeing a human. You just see visors and there's, you know, it's flesh. They say that the doctors, the nurses are amazing, but they are inhuman, because you don't know who's who. There's no, what can we do to make things warmer? And there's no doubt that we can open the windows and we can take people outside. And we've known about that since the days of tuberculosis, and that's had an amazingly positive statistics. So this is, you know, I was determined to do this whole talk through Maggie's, because it seemed to be the, so this is a piece of design for Maggie's during COVID, which is the idea of a bench which you can have intimate conversations, which is one of the most important things within Maggie's, that people can talk to each other about their deepest feelings, about expertise there, about things that they're discovering, but whilst keeping them far apart. So it's just painting these very soft, simple ideas of how can we create an intimacy, a bubble that we sit in, whilst allowing the air to change between us, so as to minimize, in a very non-scientific way, because I said from the beginning I'm very non-scientific, minimize the opportunity for contamination. So I think this kind of, this generous flow. Also, it's very important to design something which is for COVID, but will live beyond COVID. Mm-hmm. So it's a very simple, quite relaxed, hopefully poetic idea, using, again, very natural materials. It's made of natural rattan, so it has tactility to it. And I'm hoping that Barbara's statistics, when they come out, the report will prove that this is not irresponsible to use these materials which have crevices in them where things could get stuck, but whilst encouraging communication and conversation.
At least it's a human design at a human scale.
Yeah.
I think that's the beginning of every cure. But then again, I'm not a doctor, but it seems safe to say that. Thanks, Ab. And Jason, what is your future?
So, again, this was a struggle for me, because I really wanted to touch upon some things that Ab and Barbara talked about. And I think it all comes down to the idea of dignity, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
How can we design for dignity? And this image does not capture that, but I was thinking I should probably provide an image that may capture that. But what this image captures really, and it's not meant for people to read, but it's just meant to demonstrate the idea of systems thinking now that we're looking at specific to hospitals. The image on the left is what we call normal mode. The image on the right is what we call pandemic mode. And can we design spaces and places, and this is all about an inpatient unit or an inpatient ward, where if we need to flip a switch, let's just say, because of a pandemic, is there a way we can design it through not only walls and doors and place and space, but also infrastructure, that we can keep people separate and safe? One of the biggest issues that we learned through the pandemic is that for a lot of people, healthcare shut down. And even if I was not impacted by the disease, I may have other health issues that I still need to seek care for. And whether it was literally shut down or you felt like you weren't safe because you couldn't go to the hospital or couldn't seek care, healthcare was shut down. And we need to come up with ways in which we can design facilities that can maintain operations regardless of circumstances. And so the idea of layering systems thinking into this around ventilation, around being able to create vestibules, metaphorical and literal physical vestibules, so that we can maintain separation and safety of those that might be infected for those that aren't, and create the idea of a hospital being a safe place in all circumstances. And so, you know, that is what is really trying to, the message that I'm trying to communicate here. But I think at the end of the day, when you think about the stress on our caregivers, the stress on our families, the stress on the patients, and that the pandemic, to Ab's point, has stripped us away from some of that human interaction, the idea of humans healing humans. We really need to be sure that we don't forget that, because dignity at the end of the day is really what we're trying to support in design. And I think the pandemic has magnified that for all of us. And the idea of creating a chair that can hug two individuals and yet keep them separate, I think is genius. And that image, I think, to me, that you shared, Ab, is all about dignity, and it certainly should be the DNA of everything that we do moving forward.
That's a great way to end this panel, Jason. Thank you for that. Talking about dignity indeed is the begin and end of everything regarding preventing people getting ill and curing them when they get ill, as far as I'm concerned. It's been a great and fascinating panel. Thank you so much, Barbara, Ab, and Jason, for being with us and sharing your expertise and your vision of the future. Barbara, I'm looking forward to your report based on the research that you are doing. I hope somewhere next year, and then we'll make sure if you send it, if you notify us, we'll make sure to distribute it in our community, consisting of designers and architects. Ab, thank you so much for let's say, being the articulate, artistic, and human voice in this panel, without saying anything bad about the other panel members. And Jason, thank you so much for being, let's say, the architectural realist in this panel. Without saying anything bad about the other two panel members, but I think the three of you represent two very specific points of view and needed to collaborate. I think, let's say, science needs to marry architecture and needs to marry artistry to come to a solution that will, well, be good for all of us. And I think that's true for every industry, but specifically for healthcare design, because there's a lot still to win within healthcare design.
The balance is key. Absolutely.
Beautifully said, Robert.
For me, Robert, it's more of a dance than a marriage, because marriage.
Yeah. Yes.
That's great. Real artist. I'm really glad to meet you, and that goes for all of you. Really glad to meet you. Thank you for being with us. The last thing for me to say is that this has been the last Frame Live session of 2020. We'll continue somewhere in January. Please have a close look at our agenda, the newsletters that we send out, the website. All that I can inform you of right now is that we will have another live jury session for the Frame Awards for the 5th of January at 4 p.m. Central European time. I hope to see you then again. Sure. If not, all have a very happy holiday season, and I wish you all the best and all kinds of health and prosperity next year. Hope to see you back again.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
panel.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Really fun. Thank you.